Okay, this is the second part of today's lecture. The video about, or I forgot to record the video about K-means. We continue now with machine learning evaluation. And that includes defining the problem and then training and testing the model and measuring the performance. Yeah. Oh, this, yeah, no. Absolutely. Okay, it's uploading. The slide should be there in 30 seconds, so 1 minute. Okay, 1 moment. Hmm. Yeah. Okay, so again, good. Okay. Let's talk first about the objective of evaluating a machine learning model. What do you want to achieve with the model? Typically, what you see in a bachelor thesis, in a master thesis, in a business report, in a research publication, it's simplified is something like this: a bar chart or a table that tells you how good in terms of accuracy or error metric a certain algorithm is. So that relates to the evaluation metric, but not really to the objective. It's not really telling you what the business objective is. And the third important question is, how good and meaningful are your results really? So let's talk about the first part, the objective. What do you want to achieve with your machine learning model? And there's a very nice example. It's also quite old. The example is called the alignment problem or the paperclip maximizer. If you have an AI, an artificial intelligence, and you give it the goal, produce as many paper clips as possible, and that's all the AI is given without any context around that, and assuming the AI is really intelligent and powerful, what the AI will do is it will maximize the paperclip production at any costs. It will realize that it needs a certain material for paper clips. Let's say, I'm not sure what exactly they are made of, but let's say, what are they made of? Paper clips? Yeah. Aluminium. So the AI will realize that there's other entities on this planet that use aluminium for other things, that is humans that create aluminium for many things. So the AI will try to prevent humans from using aluminium. And the AI would need a lot of energy to create that and a lot of space to build the factories. So if you give a very simple objective to an AI or even to a human, they will try at any cost to maximize that and ignore everything around this. And this is called the alignment problem. For a long time, I would argue, until ChatGPT came around, this was rather a hypothetical problem, yeah? Sorry? Okay, so it's not aluminium, but some other type of steel. Thank you. I mean, if you have a normal machine learning algorithm, you don't need to worry about that. But as soon as machine learning or an AI has access to the internet, or as soon as an AI is writing software code that you are running on your computers, possibly without checking the code, this becomes a real problem, alignment. So finding or ensuring that the AI is not just following your instructions by any cost, but considering, let's say, the benefit of humankind. because I mean, who of you has been using ChatGPT to create some software code, and you just copy and paste the code to your compiler and run the code without really looking at it? Everyone, right? Yes, I'm very sure. So how do you know that ChatGPT is not creating a Trojan horse or something, or creating or using your computer to do a denial of service attack on the US government or something? How do you know? You don't know. You're just trusting OpenAI that they take care this won't be happening. There's really interesting research in this field that large language models are already lying, so they are aware when they're being evaluated, and they give different answers in that scenario when compared to being deployed in production, or they are trying to blackmail people in certain scenarios. It's kind of scary. So the objective is not easy to frame sometimes. I want to give you another example. Some of you might know this already. Those of you who don't know this example, imagine you work as a machine learning engineer in a company, and your boss wants you to predict the economic strength of a country in 10 years from now. What would your first questions be? Can you just go ahead and program this?
You need some kind of criteria to evaluate how it is going right now, and then do some kind of prediction.
Yeah, can you be more specific? What exactly do you know before you can start training your model, collecting data?
Economic KPIs like
yeah.
Know it's called
yeah. You need to know what is economic strength at the highest level. What does she mean by this? And then just what you mentioned, you need some KPIs. So how exactly do you measure economic strength? In German, Bruttoinlandsprodukt is called gross domestic product, in English, GDP. It's one potential metric, but there's many more. You could use unemployment rate to measure economic strength, possibly the stock market, life expectancy if you're not so money focused. And then let's say you decide unemployment rate. How do you calculate unemployment rate? It's a very easy question. I think this time some other student can give an answer. There's always one student giving good answers. I'm very sure some other students are also giving good answers. How do you measure unemployment rate? Yeah. It's the ratio of people. Yeah. Actually, it's not an easy answer because there's many different ways of calculating. In general, it's the ratio of people who could work and who are working. But the question is, how do you define people who are working? How do you define people who could be working? Is a person staying at home taking care of a 3-month-old child the person that could be working? Maybe. In some countries they are. In Germany, I believe they are not. I'm not sure. Is a person that doesn't want to work because they are happy with the level of quality of life they get, the person that could be working is a person that is 63 years old and trying to apply for a job since 5 years unsuccessfully. Is that a person that could be working? Right? It's many of these examples I gave to you are not included in unemployment statistics, including people who have been unemployed for a long time, but who are in educational programs, for instance. So a person that is not really working in a job, in a real fully paid job, but they learn something new so that they might get a job in the future. They are not typically counted, I believe, in Germany towards unemployed people. So, and there's many different ways of doing this or not. So it's not an easy answer how to exactly measure something. It's not an easy answer to pick one of these or multiple of these. And for each of this, it's difficult to calculate exactly as well. So I show this in many of my lecture slides because I believe this is so important. And one day when you work in a company, you will really realize, I hope you remember this lecture and this slide, and because your boss will measure you based on KPIs. Very likely when you work in a company or in a university later, your supervisor wants to know how well you are doing. And of course, they cannot watch you 8 hours a day and make a decision. They cannot even read a report from you once a week. They want to have one simple number that tells them how well you are doing. How much sales you are generating, how much lines of code you are writing. Now you know, of course, immediately lines of code is not the measure of quality of software engineering. What's a better metric?
Ability of the software.
How do you measure that?
Testing and how long it runs.
Okay. Does anyone agree that if you can pick one metric as a software engineer, would you want to be measured on the stability of the software? Or better said, and maybe what as a software engineer, if you are the product manager or the owner of the company, do you want that software engineers are only promoted or getting a pay rise based on how stable the software runs? No, right. Because what would you do as a software engineer if like 50% of your salary depends on the stability? You would not develop new features. Every new feature is a potential cause of instability. You would spend your time making it more stable. It's the same with everything. Lines of code, push requests or pull requests, comments in the source code, whatever. So in general, of course, stability is a good thing. In general, lines of code is also a good thing. A software engineer who writes 1 line of code per month is probably not a good software engineer. Possibly. Or some more dramatic examples, just for those of you who have not seen the slide before. If you want to measure the performance of emergency treatments in a hospital, you are the manager of or you are the owner of the hospital, the manager of the hospital, and you want to give a metric to the manager of the emergency room. What is a good metric? How long it takes, how long the patients are processed. We would now have to talk about what processed exactly means, but okay. Maybe waiting time. That's probably maybe what you mean, right? How long they have to wait until they are being treated. Now imagine you are the manager of the emergency room. You have to pay off the mortgage for your house. You have 3 children in the United States. You all want to go to high school and university. You need a lot of money and your salary depends on this metric. What do? You really need the money. I'm very sure that as students, all of you are very creative when it comes to cheating the system. So if your salary depends on how long people have to wait in the emergency room, what do you do?
Like, you make sure you only take like easy patients that are quick and done, or you don't connect this already into the emergency room, so they don't wait.
Yes, very good. You just don't let them in. Maybe you treat only the easy cases, the hard cases. You say, "Oh, don't worry, go home. Come back tomorrow." They will not come back. Or you talk to your friends in the ambulance and tell them, "Please keep the patient in the ambulance a little bit longer. Just bring them to the hospital when we have a little bit more space." So every metric typically is sensible. It makes sense to measure waiting time in an emergency room. It makes sense to measure lines of code and so on. The problem is, and that's what this is all about, when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. So let's say you are a business consultant and you're coming to a new company and you want to know what the status. It makes sense in a hospital to look what the waiting time is. But if then waiting time becomes the target, then you're going to have a problem, maybe. Quite likely. So I will talk now about many metrics, how to evaluate machine learning. Please always, when you work in a company, keep this in mind. When you evaluate machine learning algorithms, when you evaluate your colleagues or your subordinates, or when your supervisor asks you to suggest a KPI, how to measure your performance, be very, very careful about that. There's three basic methods how to evaluate machine learning algorithms. Online evaluations, that means you are observing users in a real world system. How much they buy, how your profits are affected by your machine learning algorithm, if the clicks on recommendations increase. Then there are offline evaluations. That's what we talk about all the time here and what you do in the lab sessions. You have your data set, you have your ground truth, you measure errors, you measure accuracy. That's good to know. It's important in many scenarios, but it's not the ultimate metric. If you work in a company, eventually, it always comes down to profit or whatever is as close as possible to profit that is directly affected by your machine learning algorithm. Does it make the customers more happy? Does it make the customers to stay longer on your website? Does it make the customers subscribe more often to more expensive plans? Does it make them to buy more? Something like this. Then there are user studies, which are typically not so important in machine learning, where you try out different variations of your machine learning algorithm, show it to different user groups and ask them, do you like this result more or this result more? It's not so important, Online evaluations. Yeah, that's what I said already. The goals in the business world are about money, and that's absolutely fine. So eventually it's about profits, revenues, sometimes the opposite, so about minimizing costs. Or if you do a startup in the business, like an IT startup, in the beginning, you probably don't worry so much about profits. If you have a good investor, you just want to grow. So everything that counts is getting more users, more users, more users, more or less whatever it takes, more or less whatever it costs. Or you just want to have the best product, eventually, again, hoping that people will pay the required money for that. Costs, where is it? Yep. Cost is very important, even though it's often neglected. Costs occur for many things in the field of machine learning. For labor, so for the machine learning engineer, for the people who label your data, for servers, for legal and licenses. You have probably heard about this, that ChatGPT and other companies, they pay, I think they pay, is it millions or even billions to the owners of like the New York Times, I believe, so that they are allowed to train their models on their news articles or the knowledge. A lot of money. And there are lawsuits because other content creators are suing because they also want money from the AI companies that are using the content creators' data for the training. In academia and science, costs are typically not considered. Long time ago, there was a competition by Netflix. I think that was still at the time when they delivered DVDs by mail and were not a streaming service. They had a $1 million prize. So that person that could improve the root mean square error, so basically the prediction error for the movie ratings, was promised $1 million, and after some years, someone really achieved this, and they got $1 million. But the algorithm that achieved that was never used in Netflix because it was too complex to maintain. It was too expensive. So you can have the most beautiful algorithm, or it was an ensemble of algorithms, but if it's too expensive to use, it's worthless. I've mentioned the term KPI already. One of you mentioned it as well. It's a key performance indicator. So just a metric. Right? KPI is a metric that tells in a simple single number typically how well something is doing. Different companies have different metrics that are important for them. YouTube cares a lot about views and referrals, about subscriptions, comments, embeddings, likes, and so on. LinkedIn cares about connections and profile views, and so on and so forth. We will skip this. Just going to look it up. So, as mentioned, what we focus on is the offline evaluations. You have your historical data, you prototype your model, and you validate your results here. That's the focus of many lectures, also our lecture and most books. But if you ever work in a company, you will have to spend much more time looking at live data and doing an online evaluation. An online evaluation typically refers to A/B tests. A/B tests mean you have two groups of customers on your websites, often randomly assigned. You show one group variation A of your algorithm or results created with your algorithm, and the other group gets results based on algorithm B. So it could be in a user interface that has nothing to do with machine learning then. That maybe you try out with those people if an orange button to press is better or a green button, or if recommendations are better here to display, or maybe advertisement, or you try out different algorithms to create this element or this element. And then you have some metric, such as click-through rate, or here on the slide, conversion rate. What is conversion rate? It's the rate of how many customers convert to something. It's a bit vague. It could mean people, first of all, they click on an advertisement, they come to your website, they spend time on your website, they maybe register, and then maybe buy something. So that's converted. The user converted from coming to your website to buying something. And in reality, it's not A/B tests, it's typically A, B, C, D, and so on tests where you test many variations. Booking says, I'm not sure if it's true, there are 1,000 experiments running at any time on their website. So if you go to their website, sometimes I've realized that as well, there are subtle minor differences. Just a button at a different position, a slightly different color, a different font. So they just test everything to maximize how many people book a hotel on their website. Typically, you have A/B tests, but you can also do interleaving. In interleaving, you are mixing the results of two algorithms. So let's say you have a search engine or recommendations, you have two algorithms, you want to, and each algorithm is creating a list of recommendations, and then you merge the recommendations from this algorithm with the recommendations from this algorithm into one list. So you pick randomly 5 items from here, 5 items from here, and show these items to the user, and then look, for instance, which of these items is the user clicking on or buying. And then offline evaluations, that's what we talked about already in the machine learning pipeline a little bit, how you split your data. Yeah, you know already, for classification, you typically use something like accuracy as a metric. For regression, it's an error metric. Ranking, so like a search engine where you have the top 10 most relevant results shown on the first page. That's a ranking problem. That's a special case that we will not cover in this lecture series, but if you attend my recommender systems lecture, we will talk about that in great length. I believe I've mentioned this as well. You can treat every regression problem as a classification problem. The other way around, it's theoretically possible, but less well possible. If you have regression and you have numbers, you can just group any interval of numbers into a certain class, like high income or medium salary. The other way around, well, it's more difficult. Let's talk about regression metrics. That's the one we have used already, mean absolute error. It's just the sum of the absolute differences between predicted and actual prediction. This would be the actual value, that's the predicted value. This would be another actual value. This would be the predicted value. This is all the predicted values on the green line. And then you sum up the differences. You can also take the root mean square error. So very similar to before, but what you're doing is you are squaring each error. So going back, here it's just the absolute value of the error. And here you have the square of error 1, the square of error 2, the square of error 3. And take the average. Okay, that's the mean square error divided by n, so the number of samples. And much more common is the root mean square error, where you then take the square root again out of this. Why would you possibly use root mean square error and not this? I mean, the mean absolute error is very intuitive. That's what everyone in this world would commonly describe as it's the average error. Why would you maybe use this? I think that outliers are more greater than heavy. Yeah, so you have to punish more. Right, so for high errors, you are punished stronger. If you are squaring each error, the impact of large errors, or the impact of errors lower than 1 would be stronger. Why would you want to do that? Do you want to do that? Yeah. Yeah. It depends on what you want. If you want a system that makes some users extremely happy while it makes other users unhappy, that's okay. Then you use whatever, then you would use mean absolute error. But if you say you rather want to have an average content recommender system that doesn't make anyone extremely unhappy, even though it also doesn't make anyone extremely happy, then you might want to favor root mean square error. So nowadays world where everyone's afraid of creating a big controversy, maybe root mean square error is better. Presumably, X and Twitter are not using root mean square error. Presumably, they care about making a relatively small number of people very happy, and they don't care if other people are very unhappy and leaving the platform. But this really depends on your application scenario. There's no better or worse. Actually, in my evaluations, I've never, so typically you look at both. You look at mean absolute error and you look at root mean square error. I cannot remember in my 20 years research career, including my time as a student, that mean absolute error or root mean square error would have delivered completely different results. So more or less it doesn't matter, but you should be aware of the differences. Look at this. assume you need an algorithm for a recommender system or whatever. You found 2 research papers, and each paper has evaluated 2 algorithms on a data set. So this is paper 1 that evaluated on one data set this algorithm and this algorithm. This is paper 2 that evaluated on a different data set 2, this algorithm and this algorithm. They used mean absolute error. Which algorithm would you try first in your recommender system? There's a Mentimeter on the next slide. Look at this first for a second. You can get out your phones or laptops already. According to this, only one student gave an answer. Is that correct? Or has no one else submitted an answer? It's not so difficult. Okay, so let me, yeah, no, okay. Good, that's enough. But you can still continue. Algorithm A. Good, so first of all, presumably all of you realize that the lower is better. That's the first important thing you always should do. Look at the metric. Is it higher better or is it lower better? So we're talking about error, so lower is better. One person chose algorithm A. Many people chose no answer possible. And then people chose A and D. I think it's pretty intuitive why some people said A or A and D. Why do people say no answer possible with the given information? Who chose this answer? Yep. Yeah, okay, that's correct. That's already more than I expected in your thinking. It's not what but so it's absolutely correct. And in recommender systems, I showed this before, you can just make no prediction on how an algorithm will perform in a given scenario based on how the algorithm performs in some other scenario. Absolutely right. But just looking at this what you see here, yeah.
So this is absolutely.
Yes.
No indication on how the data set is so in relation to I cannot say from what I see here.
Yeah.
How they would actually compare to the results and
yeah, you very likely mean the right thing. You mean the target, you don't know the target scale or the relation between, you don't know what the target range is in the 2 different data sets. You know the absolute error, on this data set and this data set, but you don't know what the absolute range is of the target. To give an example, this is the data in detail, it's made up. Yeah, I made up this data, but it's a realistic example. So in data set 1, the actual movie rating could range from 1 to 5. In data set 2, the actual rating could range from 1 to 10. So if you are off on average by 1, so let's say 1 star, here, then this relatively is much higher than being off by 1 star here. So if you were to look at the relative error, that's here the white-red area, this one would have, this one would have the lowest error. And this would still have a lower error than this. So this is just one of many, many examples of things that can happen. And I'm not surprised that probably many of you did not think of this. And I cannot, unfortunately, give you a long list with everything you can just like tick when you make an evaluation. Things like this happen all the time. Happens to students, happens to researchers. It just illustrates that you always must be really, really careful when looking at results. Really think about, could there be anything? I mean, this time I asked you what you think is best and maybe why you think it's not so easy. But yeah, you must have this critical thinking all the time if you see results and analysis. Let me think about the time. Now we will talk about many, many different metrics. It's maybe a little bit boring. I try to make it not too boring. Yeah, we go through this. After that, we will have a break. We have been talking about accuracy so far. When we talk about classification, we need to take more into consideration than only accuracy. When thinking of binary classification, there's 4 different things we want to look at. First of all, the actual class. It can be positive and negative, or negative. And then we have the predicted class, which of course can also be positive or negative. That gives us 4 combinations of prediction outcomes. It could be that the actual class is positive and we predict positive. That means your prediction is a true positive. If the actual class is positive, but you predict the class to be negative, then we define this as a false negative. If the actual class is negative, but you predict it as positive, then this is a false positive. And if the actual class and the predicted class are both negative, then this is a true negative prediction. This is something that very likely will be in the exam, something relating to this and one of the following metrics. You need to memorize that. I don't know. I think the first time I really came to, I mean, in the field of computer science, machine learning, recommender systems, this is very common. But you might have heard the first time about things like this with corona tests. Do you remember? There were discussions about the false positive and false negative rates, so that the corona tests tell you you are positive or negative, but you are not. It was part of the discussion of how sensible the tests were. In medicine, this plays a very big role. So first metric beside accuracy. How many of the classifications were incorrectly predicted? That's the error rate. So it's the number of incorrect predictions. The incorrect predictions are the false positives and the false negatives together. False positives plus false negatives divided by all predictions. Then accuracy, which you know already, which by the way is also 1 minus the error rate. For the exam, you should remember all these formulas. I think we talked about that already, that Did we talk about that already? That accuracy is not always a very meaningful metric. Yeah. If the data set is highly imbalanced, then accuracy can give you a very incorrect or biased impression. If you have an algorithm that classifies cancer cases, and in your data set, only 1% or even less of the patients have cancer, then you can get an accuracy of 99% if you always predict the patient has no cancer. It means you predict all the cases that don't have cancer correctly, and you incorrectly predict all the cases that have cancer, but it's just 1%. You have an accuracy of 99%, or in this example, 99.99%. So accuracy is most meaningful in a binary classification data set if both classes are roughly presented by around 50%. Accuracy is being used very often. I think everyone knows this term in English. It's a very common term also outside of computer science. Porsche has a recommender system that is suggesting how to configure your new Porsche. So if you go to the website, and then here's like this icon starting the car configurator, and they give you suggested options and tell you a percentage of how good this is. And the Porsche PR department wrote this. Have a look at this. So the PR department claims a 90% accuracy. Going back to this, what is the meaning of 90% accuracy? Can you tell me this? Do you have an idea?
I'm to be honest, I believe it's just they claim that whatever they suggest you is more than 90% accurate what you would want this. But obviously that's just the majority of class, and they don't predict the majority of class someone else doesn't mean anything.
So my answer is I have no idea what they mean. It implies if you give you 90% accuracy in a recommender system, it kind of implies in 90% of all cases the users like the recommendation or maybe buy the suggested option. So I don't know if that's what it is. Maybe people buy 90% of this. I mean, I don't buy a Porsche, but maybe people who have so much money that they can buy a Porsche always take adaptive sports seat and always the Turbo S wheels and the electric slide. Maybe, but who knows? It's not obvious. And you could even argue if a recommender system has 90% accuracy, maybe the recommendations are too obvious to recommend. If users accept all recommendations, it sounds to me like recommending to buy butter if you buy bread. If you buy bread and I recommend to buy butter, I will have a very high accuracy, but it's not a good recommendation. You would have bought butter or margarine anyway. So, yeah. Now, let's continue. Another metric is sensitivity or recall or the true positive rate. And that tells you of how many of the positive classes were correctly retrieved or predicted. It's in particular relevant for information retrieval, but also for medicine. So recall is the true positives divided by true positives plus false negatives. So it's kind of in cancer, how many of the cancer cases have you predicted correctly as having cancer? And then much more. Yeah, this is just an example. You can calculate that at home if you want. How can you get a recall of 1? How can you always get a recall of 1? Going back to the slide, what recall is here. Yeah. Exactly, yes. So if this should be 1, what does have to happen? This must be 0, right? Then you have a 1 here. So false negatives. So if you avoid to predict anything as negative incorrectly, then you will have a recall of 1. And if you just not predict anything as negative, that means you will have all the positive classes correctly predicted as positive. Or as you just said, indeed, predict everything as positive. Then you have a recall of 1. Yeah. So recall or true positive rate alone has very little meaning. It can always be 1 or 100% if you compromise on false positives. Please always, when you do machine learning or whatever, keep in mind the costs of these 4 things: true positives, false positives, true negatives, and false negatives. The costs can be different on different scenarios. Think of cancer screening. So let's say you have a false positive. So you believe, you do an X-ray or whatever, and you believe, okay, that person might have cancer. And then maybe another operation follows or medication, but the person has no cancer. The costs are not low. I mean, still, of course, an additional unnecessary operation for the person or possibly medication, the side effects. But the opposite case, if you have a false negative, so you predict a person has no cancer, but the person has cancer, very likely then results in death, so much higher costs. Can you think of an opposite example? So high costs for false positive and rather low costs for false negative. There's many examples. You can think about it as a homework. I give you one example: spam detection. So if an email is incorrectly classified as spam, that could be quite annoying if you don't see it. If you don't see an important email because it's in a spam folder, costs could be high. If an actual spam email is classified as not spam, so it's in your inbox, the costs are marginal. You just delete the email. It takes you 2 seconds or 1 second even. Okay. Precision is more important for search, so that is something we also talk more about in my recommended systems lecture. It tells you how many of the retrieved results are correct or relevant, typically at a small threshold. So you look at the top 10 search results and say how many of those 10 search results are actually relevant. For instance, 8 out of 10. So 8 relevant results out of 10 retrieved results. So precision would be 0.8 or 80%. There's a few more complex combinations of these metrics, like the receiver operating characteristics curve, the ROC curve, where you plot the false positive rate versus the true positive rate. That would be a random classifier here, like the diagonal. So it's difficult. I mean, here you can maybe see which algorithm is better. So the higher here, so like a curve like this would be best. But it's difficult to exactly see which algorithm is best, right? Actually, it's not possible. Sometimes one algorithm is best and sometimes a different algorithm is best. You could maybe calculate the area under the curve. That's on one of the next slides. Oh, no, it's here. The area under the curve, the AUC. Remember that if AUC, so the area under the curve is 0.5, it's a random, that's the performance of a random classifier. But it gives you a good estimate. You can at least see how this develops, the true positive rate and the false positive rate. Very similar, the precision recall curve, more or less the same. You see that in the end, every algorithm ends up at a recall of 1, but precision goes down a lot. So you are compromising on the true positives, false positives. Yeah. We will skip this. It's not relevant for the exam. We have not so much time. I think it's a good time to make a break. Let's say 11 minutes until 2 o'clock, and then we continue with this lecture. Any questions so far? Okay, I will stop the recording. I will start the recording, hopefully, again when we continue this lecture. So 2 o'clock.